It's an event to decide the fate of South Africa's ruling party. Cyril Ramphosa has been picked to replace the party's long-term leader, incumbent President Jacob Zuma. The deputy president is also one of the country's richest men, and his election has already resulted in a rise in the national share index. The election took place at a tumultuous time for the African National Congress, or ANC. The party has been in power since the end of apartheid, but many believe its grip has been slipping.
I think they had an opportunity about a year or two ago to fix this entire situation by simply just acknowledging that they were wrong and start to fix and go on a path that can actually save the party. Where it is right now, I'm actually quite scared for it. I've got the love for it, but I'm actually quite scared for it.
Much of that concern is due to the controversies surrounding Jacob Zuma. Both he and his close family members have been accused of corruption, and the country's High Court recently ordered a judicial commission be set up to probe the allegations. Zuma has agreed to the inquiry but also fired back at those accusing him.
Being black and successful is being made to be synonymous with being corrupt or being corrupt. The ANC must promote black advancement and success and fight attempts aimed at frustrating and undermining black economic empowerment and affirmative action.
November 2012.
But many ANC members feel there is enough to support the allegations. Zuma narrowly escaped a recent bid by Parliament to impeach him, as 26 members of his own party voted against him. The ANC's new leader now has the difficult task of uniting the party, and it will have to happen with Zuma still serving out his term as president until 2019. Will he be able to accomplish that? Or will Zuma's continued presence tear the ANC apart? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Johannesburg by Cyril Ramphosa. She's the editor-at-large at the Huffington Post, South Africa. Also in Johannesburg, we have political analyst Oliver Dixon. And in London, Zolani Qala. He's the founder of the organization South African Business Abroad. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Cyril Ramphosa, Cyril Ramaphosa is the man. Has the decision left the ANC strengthened?
Undoubtedly strengthened. I was there yesterday just as the results announcement were made, and it was quite a moment to see him grinning very, very widely, because you'll know that he's waited a long time for this job, and for all of this year South Africa has been sitting on the edge of its seat waiting for him to become ANC president.
Well, Lani, as an ANC man, I guess the feeling is that within the ANC they feared in 2019 they were, if not going to lose in the election, going to face a huge dent to their hopes, because some would say the ANC has been complacent in the past couple decades. Is this an example of the ANC internally trying to reform and to arrest a possible decline?
Look, first and foremost, I must speak from the angle of how does South Africans in their diaspora, particularly in the business angle, out of South Africa. We must acknowledge and congratulate the African National Congress as a leading political party and the oldest in Africa as a liberation movement, to be able to conduct its internal democratic processes in a peaceful manner that they have done. They have demonstrated the highest level of morale throughout the 4 days in Johannesburg. I think for Africa, it's a serious indication to Africa and the international political parties that Africa can be able to conduct democratic processes peacefully without an interference of the Western people. And I think throughout what has been happening and the election, of course, of the experience Cyril Ramaphosa to be able as the president of the African National Congress, it indicates that the African National Congress is ready for business and change is about to take place.
Oliver Dixon, given that Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was seen as a continuation of President Jacob Zuma in her policies, and he endorsed her, if she had won, would that have strengthened the opposition, the DA and the EFF?
That's entirely speculative at this stage, and I think it's untrue that Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was a continuation of Jacob Zuma's policies, because in fact Jacob Zuma's policies was a continuation of Thabo Mbeki's policies. Very little differences happened in terms of Jacob Zuma's policies. His national development plan was a continuation of a foundation that Thabo Mbeki had set. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma would have in fact been more radical in her economic policy approach than Jacob Zuma would have been. She spoke quite strongly about the reclamation of land without compensation. She spoke quite strongly about the nationalization of mines and banks at some point, and fundamental social and structural reform, which is something Jacob Zuma never really attempted to do within the ANC over his last 9 years. But whether it would have strengthened the opposition, perhaps not, because I think Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma did incredibly well to fight off or at least distance herself from Jacob Zuma.
Yeah, but
there were,
certainly,
however,
Oliver, if you'll allow me to come in for a second, right? So you have Zuma near the end or nearing the end now. He's promising free education for the poor. The candidate that he is endorsing is pushing for radical economic transformation. And you would be forgiven for thinking that the reason they were doing this, and I say they because he endorsed her, was because of the fear of the EFF and the fact that there was a noisy bunch on the left that was stealing voters from them, so they chose populism. So isn't it fair to ask if she would have been a continuation of his latest iteration where he tried to appeal to the left and go more populist?
No, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma was certainly a counter towards the EFF's policy stance and rhetoric, and that's important to notice. However, it's unfair to attribute that to Jacob Zuma. In fact, Jacob Zuma never actually explicitly endorsed Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. And the one instance where he spoke very highly of her leadership skills was not an endorsement. It was a celebration that was organized by organized churches in South Africa to celebrate her term in the African Union, because she had just returned from the African Union. So Jacob Zuma never made explicit endorsements of any particular candidate at any point in time. The eve before the elections, he spoke quite highly of Cyril Ramphosa in a business meeting at a business event for Business South Africa, where Jacob Zuma spoke quite highly about the leadership capabilities of Cyril Ramphosa and how Cyril Ramphosa carried him quite strongly and supported him quite strongly throughout his tenure as president of the ANC and president of the country.
Okay, Ferial, there's a belief in South Africa. Let me ask you if you agree with that belief that the state has been captured by the Gupta family and other business interests, because there's a belief that under President Jacob Zuma, the state has been captured. First of all, let me ask you, do you believe that it has been captured?
Absolutely. I was looking back, Imran, at some pictures of the last big ANC conference 5 years ago, 2012, and there were the Gupta brothers, almost fresh from India and sitting there as if they owned the country. In the following 5 years, they would do a number of things to, in our words, capture it, try to influence cabinet appointments, try to influence the appointments to state-owned companies so that their boards could throw contracts their way. If you track the empire that this family has built, I think it's almost unprecedented in an African developing a young democracy for such a thing to happen. And that was very much the wind beneath the wings of the Ramaphosa campaign. Okay. It's important to note, though, that he's only won by 179 votes, which does pose the question of how reformist, how anti-corruption he will be allowed to be, because he's quite hemmed in by factionalists who I would argue are aligned to that capture narrative.
Yeah, so part B of my question then, Ferial, is then if the state has been captured, how does Cyril Ramaphosa uncapture the state, given that President Jacob Zuma is still at the wheel until the 2019 elections, and Cyril doesn't want to, I guess, gamble too much and mess it all up until he gets to the election, which might actually make him the next president, right?
Sure. So I watched the stage quite carefully yesterday, and it's the most amazing thing is that you can see power beginning to fade away from President Jacob Zuma almost immediately. I'd argue that as of today, he is a lame duck president. Our system in South Africa is a party-led one, so the party puts a president in place and a party can recall him. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think his ability to contort and disfigure the state in order to bolster his private fortunes and those of his friends, that has suffered I hope, a fatal blow overnight. What should ANC President Ramphosa now do? Clearly we need a commission of inquiry into state capture, because from that justice can hopefully flow. Clearly we need a new chief prosecutor in South Africa and a criminal justice system that begins to work as well as things have worked in the private sector, where you've seen 4 or 5 multinationals really begin to pay the price for poor business practice in South Africa, where they became part of the story of corruption and part of the story of state capture.
Zolani Kala, would you support a commission of inquiry into state capture and president of the ANC and possibly president of the country in 2019, Ramaphosa, spearheading that?
Look, I think you are taking it too far. You are delaying the process already. I think let's also be able to recall what the current president of the African National Congress, the president of South Africa, have already indicated that an inquiry in this particular issue of state culture should be taking place, and that the President Zuma have indicated that he will be able, and he wished this to be taken broadly, not only about one particular family that has been alleged to have captured the state, but he wants to take it broadly to look at the Western involvement within the South African state and look at how can South Africa be able to rectify its own mistake. And if an inquiry of that magnitude take place, then South Africans and particular people of my generation will be able to identify what are the mistakes being made by our own parents, so that when it's our time to take leadership, we are then ready and prepared to know we should not work in that direction.
But Zolani,
so a comprehensive state capture, it will be something that I'm looking forward for.
Certainly, when we spoke about state capture and we fingered the Guptas, they were named, you said Western influence. What are you talking about? Who are you talking about?
Look, the single problem that you are coming up with there, and I have difficulties with, is that once you start narrowing and minimizing it to one particular family, we won't be able to understand and to go to the root cause of what is state culture.
So name some other family.
You should be able to create a platform. No. You should be able to create a platform to go to the root cause of what, because the word alone, state culture, is an English word. So you should be able to go to the root cause of what state culture is, when did it started to take place in South Africa, because I can guarantee you, it's not something new. We ought to go to the root cause of it, go to it comprehensively, and look at it. How can South Africa be able, when South Africans are going to the voting polls in 2019, vote for the political party and the president that will lead South Africa genuinely, without being captured himself, because that end up the state being captured.
One final time, Zolani, is there anyone else you're willing to name as a possible candidate to look at for state capture? So Ferial has spoken about the Guptas. I've asked about the Guptas. Is there anyone you have in mind? You say we need to look broadly. Can you name one person, one group, one family, one country that we might want to have a look at as being involved in state capture? Because you say it's very broad.
Yeah, look, your question is fair enough, and I acknowledge what you are coming up with. But I don't want to be leading the process. In South Africa, you ought to allow that the judiciary system to take a comprehensive review in this particular issue, and then once the report has been presented, then you will be able to. I don't want to lead the process. Let's allow the democratic processes to take its own course. Then once the report is presented, from there, we will be able to know. But one thing I can tell you, I'm quietly sure and I'm aware, it's not one family. There's quite a lot of them.
You feel it's broader than the Guptas.
South Africans ought to be able to know which families are those ones.
Okay. You've made your point clearly, and you don't want to tell us. Oliver Dixon, I'll ask you the same question. Has the state been captured, and how does it get uncaptured then, if you believe it has been captured, during this process in the run-up to the 2019 elections?
Ferial is incredibly correct. The state has been captured, but Xolani is correct as well. The capture of the state is not just by one family, and you asked him to provide you evidence. Here's some evidence. The night before President Jacob Zuma reappointed Pravin Gordhan for the second time, he was summoned to a meeting by the top CEOs of the top 5 banks in South Africa. Maria Ramos, the CEO of Absa Bank, which is an affiliate of Barclays Africa, summoned President Jacob Zuma and advised him on the reappointment of Pravin Gordhan. You may ask, does that qualify as state capture? To the current definition we have, yes, it does, because state capture, as we currently understand it, is a group of individuals, or an individual per se, who influences the decision-making of the president, particularly when that individual is not a member of government and has not been elected by the general public. Okay. So a state capture does extend as far as the financial sector, which has been found by international forensics organizations to have been playing in currency fixing, in deliberately manipulating the rand to the detriment of the poorest of South Africans.
Let me then ask Ferial, given that the rand strengthened at the news that Cyril Ramaphosa was elected as the head of the ANC, the markets seem to like him. He's seen as a pragmatist. He's not seen as an economic idealist. He made tens of millions of dollars himself after being head of a mine workers union. Now, would there be a case on the other side from the Zuma faction to say Cyril Ramaphosa is status quo? He is a part of the old moneyed elite?
I think that certainly the markets have been waiting all year, sitting on lots of investment billions, very skittish about all the allegations that have come up this year, and including, like I said, 4 Western multinationals right in the center of the story. So yes, they were waiting for good news, and for good news for them meant Cyril Ramaphosa. Is that a mistake? I'm not sure. I feel like he is hemmed in, but the proof of the pudding is going to be in how he signals what he's going to be doing from today, tomorrow, his first big speech in January, and then to look what does our State of the Nation address look like in February, and what does our national budget look like again later in February. I think we could have nebulous debates about whether the currency is being shorted or not, but the reality of South Africa is 1 in 2 of our people are unemployed, and 1 in 2 are also poverty-stricken. And for me, what we require now is pragmatic leadership that has its eyes only on the poor and only on the unemployed.
Oliver Dixon, the party had in the past forced out a president, Thabo Mbeki. Is it likely that Cyril Ramaphosa would force out Jacob Zuma before the elections?
It's unlikely, but you certainly will see a vote of no confidence come February when Parliament reopens, and come January, in fact, when Parliament reopens. The opposition parties would be very eager to put down a vote of no confidence. They may have a greater chance of success at this stage, but Jacob Zuma enjoys 80% of support in his own caucus. 80% is a significant number at this stage, so I don't see it dipping anything below 60% at this stage. Cyril Ramaphosa wouldn't attempt, I think, to try and oust Jacob Zuma at this time. They may have discussions behind closed doors where Cyril Ramaphosa may plead to Jacob Zuma to make an early exit, and Jacob Zuma would orchestrate the exit by himself, if anything at all. But Cyril Ramaphosa wouldn't attempt to do that publicly. However, and importantly here, Jacob Zuma has great support in the newly elected top 6. That's to say, Ace Magashule and Paul Mashatile are great supporters of Jacob Zuma, has vowed their support for Jacob Zuma, and they would block any such attempt, if any at all, by Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make, and I'm glad that you did. Unfortunately, I've got to move on. So
Absolutely.
Oliver Dixon, Ferial Haffajee, and Xolani Kala, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.